Ever since I can remember, they told me I was made to carry a surname like one carries a crown. Not a crown of gold and jewels, but one of responsibility, image, and control. The name D'Arcy didn't open doors. It created them, and I was molded to be the face of that dynasty, polished from childhood by governesses, consultants, and even stylists, as if I were a fine porcelain project ready to be displayed in a global showcase. While other girls played with dolls or dreamed of college, I was taught to smile with the right eyes, speak without missing a comma, and never show hesitation. Because every misstep of mine would echo in magazine columns and become ammunition for those who wanted to see my castle crumble. And in that calculated world, there was only one variable I could never predict: my sister. Lillian always had something enchanting about her. She was the kind of presence that made people stop and look twice. Lighter, more spontaneous, easier to love, at least at first glance. While I was revered, she was adored. And yet, there was never any doubt about who would inherit the family's invisible throne. I was the firstborn, the legitimate one, the one who studied 3 languages before turning 10, who knew how to smile at a senator and respond firmly to a journalist's loaded question. Lillian didn't need that. All she had to do was show up, smile, charm, and everyone melted, including my father. But charm is not the same as trust. And as much as he loved her, it was me he trusted. For years, I tried to pretend there was more between us than a social pact. We tried to be sisters at birthdays and charity events, posing side by side as a symbol of unity, as if we shared something beyond blood. But once the last flash of the night faded, the silence between us spoke, louder than any speech. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't jealousy. It was something colder, as if she knew I was occupying the place she believed she belonged in. And even without saying a word, I felt it in her lingering looks, in the questions she asked, and above all, in the ones she didn't. That weekend, everything changed. I remember the morning my name was announced as successor. The hall was packed, the applause came in waves, deafening, mechanical, as if the whole world had been waiting for it as much as I had. My father touched my hand firm. My mother nodded, with her eyes. And then I turned to my sister. She was smiling. Not an ordinary smile, but something too refined to be genuine. The kind of smile you offer when you're giving something up, or hiding a knife behind your back. In that moment, something inside me trembled. I didn't know it, but I was standing at a point of no return. Because that wasn't the day I won the throne. It was the day I began to lose it. And to lose myself. The name rang loud in the hall, and yet it felt small under the weight it carried. Avelyn D'Arcy, repeated by influential voices, sealed by headlines in the same instant, as if fate had already been printed in gold ink on the pages of history. Some smiled out of courtesy, others out of convenience. But my sister, Lillian, smiled for another reason. It was almost imperceptible, but I knew every detail of her face, and that smile had nothing to do with celebration. It had calculation. It had control. She knew what was coming, perhaps even before I did. I returned home that night feeling my body lighter than my heart. The nomination, the speech, the toasts, everything went as expected, but still, there was an unease that wouldn't leave me. I grew up surrounded by fake people, professional flatterers, and I learned to detect lies before they even took shape. But what bothered me now wasn't what was said. It was what Lillian didn't say. She hugged me in front of the guests, as the script demanded, but the stiffness of her fingers on my back told me more than any compliment. And after that, she vanished for days. Lillian always knew how to slip through the corners of the house, like an elegant shadow. When she wanted, she was the life of a party. When she didn't, she was an untouchable mystery. But I knew her absence wasn't random. Confirmation came quietly through a slip from our private driver, a half-heard conversation, the name of a lawyer outside our family's usual circles, and a destination off the usual path, an old building in the financial district, a place that had nothing to do with the world we grew up in. The kind of place where secrets hide in sealed folders and silent agreements. In the days that followed, my life seemed to unfold in two layers. On the outside, I was Avelyn D'Arcy, the young heiress of a modern dynasty, called to lead institutions, give interviews, and inspire young entrepreneurs. But inside, every gesture carried doubt. Every word exchanged with Lillian was a minefield covered in flowers. And something told me she wasn't just swallowing her pride. She was planning her next move. The difference between envy and vengeance is that one merely watches, the other acts. And I was starting to feel that my sister wasn't the type to just watch. There was a time when I believed secrets died in silence, that not speaking about something was enough to bury it. But growing up, a D'Arcy taught me that secrets, in fact, germinate. They take root in what's unsaid, grow in averted glances, bloom in absences. And when they finally surface, they don't come alone. They come laden with consequences. The problem was, at that moment, I didn't yet know what secret Lillian had cultivated. I only felt something blossoming behind her rehearsed silence. I started paying closer attention. The times she left, the contacts she avoided mentioning, the messages she received and hid as if they were trivial nonsense. But I knew her. Lillian was never trivial. Even her spontaneity was carefully crafted. I also began to notice how, subtly, certain figures started approaching me, only to pull away, as if something about me now burned at the touch. Business people who once sought me for joint projects began to hesitate. Journalists who were once cordial became cautious. And even, at home, my father grew more distant. Small gestures, sentences cut off midstream, phone calls I walked in on at the tail end. Something was moving, and I wasn't part of the choreography. The tipping point, however, came in the form of paper. An envelope left anonymously in my room. Official letterhead. A leaked internal memo from the family foundation, and in it, my name tied to a series of financial decisions I never made, manipulated documents, adjusted dates, and a forged signature so precise it chilled my blood. Not just because someone was trying to frame me, but because only one person in the world had access to that information and that signature, my sister. I wanted to confront her right then, to tear through the veneer of hypocrisy she wore so proudly. But I held back, because more than anger, what I felt was disbelief. It was pain. It was the kind of rupture that doesn't happen all at once, but builds in layers like rust on an old gate. You only notice when it finally breaks. Lillian wasn't just trying to take something from me. She was erasing me from our family's story, wiping me from the pages while smiling for the cameras as if nothing was happening. On the last night of the month, we were invited to a charity event. It was tradition. And there we were, side by side, as always. Her in a blood-red dress, me in my mask of emotional porcelain. When we stepped onto the stage to thank the donors, she grabbed my arm, her fingers cold, firm, and before I could pull away, she leaned in and whispered in my ear, "It's easy to be loved when you're the favorite. Let's see how you handle the opposite." Then she smiled at the audience. And in that smile, there was more than arrogance. There was a declaration of war. In the days following that whisper, something inside me broke quietly but irreversibly. There was a cruel difference between suspecting a betrayal and hearing it spill from the mouth of someone you tried to love as a sister. Her words stayed etched in me like an unwanted tattoo, visible even when hidden, painful even when forgotten for a moment. I kept smiling at events, answering emails with courtesy, playing the character the world expected of Avelyn D'Arcy. But inside, everything was cracked, and the more I pretended normalcy, the more I felt like I was living a play written by someone else. Her war against me wasn't waged with shouts or public declarations. It was subtle, surgical, almost elegant. One cut at a time. An ally who stopped responding. A contract that vanished from my desk. A journalist who began questioning decisions that, until yesterday, were praised. And with every new move, Lillian kept her distance, clean, untouchable, as if she weren't the one pulling the strings, just a sympathetic bystander to my fall. It was a cruel strategy. While weakening me from within, she strengthened herself on the outside. Her image grew, her influence expanded, and her voice began to be heard with more respect than ever. I started to realize she had more people on her side than I'd imagined. People who, perhaps out of convenience, fear, or hidden resentment, began feeding doubts about me. And what was a whisper became a rumor. What was a rumor became a headline. Suddenly what I said was questioned. My steps, watched. My demeanor, interpreted as arrogance. The weight of the surname that once lifted me now seemed to drag me down. I'd been taught to handle external adversaries, competitors, the press, image crises. But no one taught me how to defend myself against someone who knew every weakness, every trauma, every memory I tried to hide, even from myself. One day, I walked into the old family library, a place I'd avoided since adolescence, filled with portraits, inherited books, and tucked away memories, and closed the door behind me, unhurried. I sat on the floor by the unused fireplace, and for the first time in years, I let my body give in. I didn't cry. I couldn't. But I closed my eyes and imagined what it would be like to disappear. Not to run away, not to vanish, but to simply stop being Avelyn D'Arcy. Because at that moment I no longer knew who I was when I took off the mask that held me together. And that was the most painful part. Realizing that even before destroying me publicly, Lillian had already dismantled me from within. But even silence doesn't last forever. And deep down, though I was exhausted, something in me resisted. A remnant of pride, maybe. But it was more than that. It was my mother's name on the picture frame above the shelf, the memory of nights when she told me true power lies in the strength with which we rise when the world tries to bend us. It was the recollection of everything I'd sacrificed to be where I was. I didn't yet know how or who to trust, but I knew I couldn't keep waiting to be saved, because the truth, no matter how hard they try to bury it, always finds a crack to breathe through. I started moving in silence. I learned that from her. Every step calculated, every word measured, every gesture disguised. If Lillian had made manipulation an art, I needed to learn the language. But I didn't want to become like her. I didn't want to wear the same armor of coldness. I just needed to survive the battlefield she'd created. And for that, I needed answers. I went back to the Foundation's records, re-examined contracts, schedules, old emails, archived conversations, all with the care of someone who knows they're being watched. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized the truth lay in the gaps. The subtext, the conversations erased too quickly. It was in a solitary early morning that I found the first loose thread, a discreet bank trail, a donation made in the Foundation's name that never had my approval, an unknown name tied to a shell company. And as I pulled that thread, I found it led to something bigger, overinflated contracts, deals made under my signature, meetings logged on dates when I wasn't even in the country. All orchestrated with precision, all meticulously designed to fall on me. These weren't just lies. It was a plot planned long ago, and I'd been too blind to see the trap being set beneath my feet, one step at a time. The next morning, I sought out my father. For the first time in weeks, He met me with a look heavy with doubt, as if he no longer knew whether to trust me or had already been clouded by the fog of suspicion my sister had sown around me. I showed him the documents, the records, the digital, trails. I waited for him to rise in outrage, to say it was all absurd. But what I got was a tense silence. A silence that said, I need to think. And in that moment, I understood that the war was no longer just between me and Lillian. It was against the version of me she'd planted in everyone's minds. Each new day brought more pieces into place. I learned she'd cozied up to old. Company advisors offered perks for their support, whispered doubts where loyalty once stood. And the more I investigated, the more I saw how my absence backstage had given her room to take root. She'd used my trust as a shield and my silence as fertile ground. But the cruelest part wasn't the theft of my position. It was the theft of my identity. Lillian was erasing the Avelyn the world knew and replacing her with a distorted, weakened, manipulable version. A woman who deserved to fall, and yet part of me still refused to hate her completely, because as much as she was burying everything I'd built, I could still see the girl who shared my childhood bedroom. The girl who cried in secret when our parents fought behind closed doors. The sister who once held my hand during a speech. That terrified me. Those memories battled the harsh truths before my eyes. But at that moment, memory wasn't enough to save her, and maybe not even to save me. Because what was at stake was no longer just a name. It was who I'd be when this was over. If there was anything left of me to rebuild, I knew the final blow would come publicly. Lillian wasn't the type to settle for backstage. She wanted an audience, and I felt the strike approaching like winter. Inevitable, cold, and drawn out. The invitation to the International Awards ceremony arrived like a smokescreen. It was a night to honor young global impact leaders, and ironically, I was the main honoree. I tasted the bitter sarcasm in the first paragraph of the text. Still, I accepted the invitation. Because even if it was a trap, I needed to be there. To fall, if it came to that, or to resist. That night, as the flashes danced around me as always, I realized how deafening loneliness can be even in a crowd. I greeted faces that once smiled with enthusiasm and now hesitated a second too long. I received compliments wrapped in caution, as if every word could be used against its speaker. And at the center of it all was her. Lillian, flawless, radiant, the kind of beauty that demands attention without asking. She gave me a look that was almost pitying. Almost. Because beneath it, there was a glint of anticipation. The kind of glint only found in someone who knows the stage is set and the final script is about to begin. And it began. During the opening speech, the presenter veered off script. In a spontaneous move, he started mentioning controversies that had surfaced in recent months, raising doubts about the integrity of the projects I led, hinting that perhaps the award had been rushed. And before I could react, the screens lit up. A montage of carefully curated headlines, leaked audios, distorted documents, all thrown out as undeniable truths. There was no room for defense, no room to breathe. It was a symbolic execution. Broadcast live, inside everything in me screamed, but outside I kept my composure, because I learned early that D'Arcys don't collapse in public. They fall in silence and rise in the dark. When it was over, when the frozen applause faded and the awkward smiles retreated, I left through the side door. I didn't look back. I didn't explain, because in that moment I understood. They'd taken everything from me, my reputation, my prestige, my respect. But they hadn't taken the one thing Lillian would never understand. What's born of truth doesn't die in scandal. The next morning, my absence was headline news. Avelyn D'Arcy, the missing heiress, the silent princess, a mystery fueling theories. I didn't respond to anyone because I wasn't silent. I was observing, planning, rebuilding, and for the first time in a long time, recognizing myself outside the armor I'd worn since childhood. They'd made me an image and then destroyed that image. But they didn't know that, beneath the rubble of the woman they created, someone was emerging who no longer depended on their approval, nor on Lillian's permission. Disappearing was the most deliberate choice I'd made in years, not out of weakness, but strategy, because there was a kind of noise that could only be fought with silence, and a kind of truth that only reveals itself when no one's watching. For weeks I stayed off the radar. No appearances, no statements, no justifications. The papers speculated, my adversaries celebrated, and Lillian, she shone. She took roles that weren't hers, was photographed in places she once refused to be, and adopted a tone of reconciliation and renewal, as if she'd won not by a coup, but by merit. And maybe, to those looking from the outside, she had won. But what she didn't know, or underestimated, was that I no longer needed the stage to exist. In my retreat, I went after what I'd overlooked for too long, the truths hidden in the folds of our history. I spoke with old allies silenced by fear. I sifted through files, digital trails, disguised donations, swapped names, fake contracts. And beyond evidence, I found wounded people, people who'd been used, discarded, or coerced by her and the circle she'd built behind my back. What was once just intuition was now a tapestry of lies carefully stitched and ready to unravel. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. The truth, when clear, needs no embellishment. I organized the documents, selected the records, prepared what needed to be shown. And when I returned, I didn't ask for permission. I scheduled an exclusive interview with the only journalist who years ago had promised she'd only publish something from me when I had something truly worth saying. She expected a rant. She got a bombshell on national television with names, dates, official records, and undeniable proof of fraud, institutional embezzlement, and forgery. It wasn't an attack. It was a surgical exposure. I wasn't there to destroy anyone, just to turn on the light and let the world see who was at the center of the charade. Lillian's fall wasn't as cinematic as mine. No screens, no scandals in gala halls. It was slower, more real. The looks began to avoid her. Her allies fell silent. The invitations stopped. And the name she'd tried to raise at my expense began to sink under the weight of the truth. She tried to deny, to downplay, to deflect. But nothing washes away mud when it spreads everywhere. And in the end, her image, always her most precious asset, shattered with the same delicacy with which she'd destroyed mine. I could have demanded formal justice. I could have taken her to court, ruined what little dignity she had left. But I didn't. Not out of weakness, but because I understood that winning isn't always about crushing. Sometimes winning is moving forward with your head high while others stay trapped in their own snares. And in that moment, I no longer needed to be the perfect heiress. I no longer needed to be accepted by a world that applauded me while tearing me apart. I was Avelyn D'Arcy, and that was enough. Because what remained in me after the ruin was exactly what made me rise again. I never returned to the old D'Arcy mansion. It's still there, with its cold corridors and antique portraits, but it belongs to a time that no longer serves me. Today, I walk streets where no one pronounces my name like a title, and I like that. I've learned the difference between reputation and identity, and only one is indestructible. Lillian left the city. We haven't spoken since. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever understand each other, if she'll realize I didn't fight her out of revenge, but for myself. And that, deep down, what she wanted wasn't to destroy my image, but to be seen. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. I still carry scars. Some visible, others stitched inside. But I don't hide them. They're my proof that I walked through a fire and came out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. I was the perfect princess. I was the fallen woman. I was the silenced heiress. And today, I'm just Avelyn, and that's enough.